and sharing resources more effectively and efficiently. Our website, Buncombe Rental Assistance, is a one-stop shop for landlords to be matched with tenants and agency partners that best match their needs. By working together, we have created shared standards of service that increase expectations for everyone involved. So we're not just doing more, but we're doing it better. We're collecting data that we can bring to you to share our success and inform what works and where we need to be different or better. We're on track to meet or exceed our goal of 115 households placed by June the 30th. We're just getting started, and we look forward to what we can accomplish in the years ahead. And I have a statement from one of our tenants that she emailed the commissioners. Say, my name is Kendra. I'm a participant of the Thrive Asheville program. I'm new to this program, but it has a huge impact on me and my children. I moved to Asheville with my 3 children in 2021, living in public housing for a little bit over a year. I was introduced to Thrive program. I was searching for a decent, safe residence for my children, and I was unable to find something that would accept my voucher. So I reached out to Thrive, and Crystal worked with me. She called me and explained me how could she help. And I was super relieved to have assistance in this huge rental market. Crystal was very knowledgeable and helpful and seemed to understand my situation. Crystal has constantly checked on me and make sure that I have the resources that I need. This program has really made easier for me to maintain safe environment for me and my children. Now I work full-time. I'm a nursing student at Galen College of Nursing of Asheville. All because of Thrive, I have finally reached out my goals without worrying about housing or paying more than I can afford to live in a safe home. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much. Hey, I have one quick question. And maybe it's not a quick question. So of the 115 residents, those aren't necessarily all landlords that are new to accepting vouchers. Are they like probably a lot of them, but they're not, that's not necessarily, my question is like how many new vouchers, how many new landlords are accepting
How many
vouchers?
new landlords?
Or new units are accepting vouchers through the program?
I will have to get that.
And
Yeah,
you can totally
that number.
circle back with us.
Yeah.
But that was a question I've been
Yes.
wanting to get an update on. So if y'all
Absolutely.
can send that to us,
Perfect.
that would be awesome. But thank you
Thank
for
you.
being here. Terrific.
But
All right,
those
anyone-
are all new households. So those 100 plus households, that number we discussed, those are all just since the grant funding that was over. So that's why we wanted to, but we'll get to the number of families.
That are new to accepting vouchers.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. Anyone else? Public comment. All right.
There was also a public comment submitted online through email. It was included in your materials.
Thank you so much. Very good. All right. Next item are the meeting minutes from March 19th.
I will make a motion to approve the minutes from the previous meeting.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Terrific. Okay, now we come to presentations. And the first one is the Affordable Housing Studies funding updates.
All right, so today's meeting, I'll kind of preview a little bit. Jonathan and other staff are going to go through the last of the projects which we haven't formally presented to you and applications. So they'll be going through those shortly. But first, we kind of wanted to set the stage to talk about the available funding that exists across a number of different funding sources to apply to the projects. Then the team will go through all the rest of the applications, and that will prepare you for next week's discussion about desired allocations to the different projects and which funding sources that you might want to use to support those. So, and I apologize, this chart is small and it is printed out for you by the time you put all these numbers together. But what it's intended to show is the amount of prior year funding, which is largely unallocated and could be applied to 2025 projects. We had set aside in 2023 funding to support affordable housing professional services studies, including DFI, and the necessary additional studies for the Cox Avenue sites and others. We anticipate that we won't need that full amount that had been identified. So we have some of that which could be reallocated into other projects, as well as the construction loan for Volunteers of America. So in this exercise, we're showing basically there are some applications that are coming back in this cycle, but they're kind of being unallocated from prior year. We would actually act to move the money into the current year award. So these may be what I call like out and then back in projects, but for purposes of budgeting, they would come out of 23 and move into 25 if you chose to fund them again. So you see that is what's happening in 24 as well on the construction loan to MHO for Star Point. There is one project, however, which is not moving forward. We've received indication from the Housing Authority that they are not moving forward with the D Review redevelopment phase 1 plan as originally anticipated. So that frees up an existing allocation of about 1.56 million. So cumulatively, between the two prior years, projects that are kind of leaving that fiscal year and potentially moving into the other, we have just under 3.5 million in unallocated available funds. We did go in and look at program income. As you'll recall, we collect program income from loan repayments throughout the year. And at this point in the year, we have received just over 100,000 in program income that could be applied to projects as well. So increasing that to almost 3.6 million. We did want to take a moment to look at the bond funding as well. And so there are two projects that have made application again. So again, kind of freeing up the funding and then potentially reallocating it. But when those two are taken into account, there is an unallocated balance of around 36 million in bond funds to apply to projects. But again, could be reapplied to those that are listed here.
There's how much unallocated?
36 million in bond, plus an additional almost 3.6 million in affordable housing services program funding. And this doesn't include any requests from the FY 2025 fiscal year to support the activities of the Affordable Housing Services Program, which is around $2.3 million annually that you typically request.
Okay. The part I don't understand is the difference between the 26 and the 36 million.
Sure. So the applicants are effectively, with Mirabel, let's take that project example, they have an existing $8.4 million allocation. They have asked for funding under the 2025 cycle in a slightly different amount. And so it's kind of, again, an out and an in. So it's like they're giving it up, but asking for it again in the same cycle. But it's just to say there is the potential that you could not fund that project. So we don't want to artificially show that commitment being there if you chose not to pursue funding it.
No one freak out, but hypothetically, like we didn't fund Redwood and Mirabel, it would be 36 million.
Right. It's just a weird way of having to kind of reflect. It's not committed because they've asked for something different and you're reconsidering it. In looking at the requests, just thinking about how you could fund the projects, the grant applications that came in are around 2.2 million. Those you could fund with the Affordable Housing Services Program funding, the general fund dollars that we use for that, and prior year, reallocation. The loan applications, they're at $37 million in requests. You could fund those activities with both the AHSP or the bond fund sources. There are some other projects that we'll probably need to have weigh-in from the Affordable Housing Committee on how potentially to fund those. They're listed next. That's the STR Conversion Incentive Program, which you heard about at your last meeting, and indicated to use some of that study funding to do that first $15,000 look into that activity. Those could be funded with AHSP funds. And then two projects which we think might need a funding commitment as early as fiscal year 2025, and that's the Cox Avenue project and then the Ferry Road project. We did list a range in the potential funding gap on the Cox Avenue project, which was recently provided by DFI. And so this slide is intended to show kind of what is the range of asks. We always like to show that the asks often outweigh the available funds. Again, here are the requested applications. They're totaling around 39 million. Those other three projects, which need to be considered how we might want to fund those, is a range of another 34 to about $40 million in request. So kind of our outstanding ask are sitting between 73 million and almost $80 million, with prior year reallocations, program income, and bond funding. We have about $39 million available, which is as much as a $40 million shortfall if we were fully funding everything that's on this list. Again, this doesn't include any general fund allocation from FY 2025, which has been consistently in the last several years about $2.3 million.
So thank you for all this really, really great look into the future pipeline of projects that we're aware of. You know, on Ferry Road, which, you know, the city council just did this zoning approval for, and we're just really happy with that. And, you know, the folks at DFI were like, still a long road ahead, right? So like, so, and then we're going to talk more about Cox Avenue at our county commission meeting tonight, and probably, you know, greenlight next steps on that. So I guess my question is like, so we're making definite decisions about moving these projects ahead with these cost estimates, but when do like actual specific funding commitments get attached to one of those? Like Cox Avenue is anticipated to probably be arriving first. Is that right? And Ferry Road is a longer term kind of like planning process before like there's real proposals from a real developer who's like, I need this much money. So I don't know, just could you say a bit more about the scheduling around those? Because those are large projects, right? So
They are, you know, the process for soliciting the developer is largely being managed with DFI. Obviously, we're going to actually issue it, but we haven't yet developed our RFP for Cox Avenue. That will be coming back through the board. Ferry Road is kind of a little bit ahead in their process. So I know you'll be hearing from Tim Love today about kind of Ferry Road and how that project is progressing. The timeframes for responses, I mean, the actual period for the RFP to be open isn't quite that lengthy. It's really the development agreement negotiation process that can take, you know, the estimate that we've been given is 9 months to a year to actually reach an agreement. And part of that may be involving what additional local commitment that we are willing to make in order for the developer to feel like they can identify any other gap funding that perhaps we are not providing.
Yeah.
So it will be a negotiation process with a developer through that RFP activity, but we've been given the idea that it's a 9-month, 12-month process. And Matt can certainly add to that any additional details he might have.
Yeah, I think DFI is anticipating that basically negotiation and execution of agreements would be completing and wrapping up summer of 2025. So another year from now.
So for Ferry Road,
This is for Cox Avenue
Cox
specifically.
Avenue.
Yeah.
So next year, we're going to be like in advanced discussions with a real developer on that project, meaning that we're going to be able to say, like, here's what the county's prepared to commit and exactly how we would do it, right? Because if you're at that stage, then like you want to know like exactly how Buncombe County are you going to deliver these funds you're talking about, right? So because part of what I guess I'm like just thinking about is like seeing this is that, I mean, with the bond funds being approved not that long ago, it's like, that's great. And it's this big amount of more money we've ever had to work with at the county level for housing initiatives. But with projects we've already committed to, projects that are in our funding mix this year, I mean, it's just not hard to see that like we can't just say, oh, well, we can always use the bond money to do it, because like we're going to pretty quickly have like real projects that exceed that amount. So we're going to have to come up with like a plan for like what are the funding strategies beyond the voter approved bonds, right? So just that conversation sounds like we're going to be getting into it soon, right?
Sure. Surely over the next year.
Great.
And certainly when you have your discussion about allocations this year, it would, obviously, these are recommendations coming out of committee to the full board. It's going to be an indication of how much bond funding you're recommending not be allocated. And that would be what would be available to support any activities that are bond eligible, like Cox Avenue and or Ferry Road.
Yeah.
So depending on allocation recommendations, it's by default limiting or making enough money available to do other activities. So.
Okay, and in terms of Ferry Road and Cox Ave, and those projects, I mean, obviously, their affordable housing is like the big driver for both of those developments. So we're sitting here talking about them today, but the whole commission's involved in those conversations too, right? Because it's county-owned property, so like the county is kind of a developer in a way, or a developer. So in terms of the non-voter-approved bond resources and the exploration of what those options are those being kind of largely driven through the finance office in the county? I'm just trying to kind of understand like whose point on thinking about that. Is it kind of folks in our meeting today, or is it finance, or like where are those conversations kind of like going to be kind of, I'm sure you'll all be involved, like who's kind of leading that
Sure.
process?
We're really supporting on Ferry Road project, for example. We're involved in and supporting that affordable housing component. There is certainly the bond funds, just as clarification for everybody listening, it is really a debt. It's a type of debt that we're using to take on to achieve projects. So there is a cost to that. There are other types of debt which have been mentioned as possible avenues. It will definitely be a discussion with finance. And at this point, we're supporting the Ferry Road project on the affordable housing component, but it is a multifaceted component, and that's going through a different division. And so I imagine that they're having those conversations with finance. But really, it's part of the whole picture of the willingness of the county to take on different types of debt and other and also general fund allocations to make all of the projects and activities it wishes to support. So that's definitely a budgeting, finance, and management discussion about taking on debt.
Great. I mean, because part of this is going to be like, obviously, there's not another bond referendum on the ballot like for voters this year, right? So the soonest that could potentially come back around be like maybe 26, right? It's got to be coinciding with other elections. So I just want to make sure as we look at these different projects that, because at this point we haven't necessarily, I mean, there's been ideas discussed sort of internally about like alternatives to voter-approved bonds as like financing options, but they haven't been real in depth. They've been kind of conceptual. So I'm just sort of eager to learn more about like when are we going to confirm there is another option, right? So we don't get far enough down the road with Cox Avenue and we're all like so excited about it, and then it's like, well, you know, look, the voter-approved bond funds are largely committed. So for a project of that size, like if we got in a position where we thought like another bond referendum is the only way to fund it, but then you can only do that every now and then with other elections, like do we suddenly, is that, I just don't want the project to get stuck, right? So
2028 could feel too late. Yeah.
it sounds like it probably would be too late. So maybe 26 would be okay, but anyway, we don't have to figure all that out today. You're just like, I just think this is really interesting to hear like how some of these strategic funding questions are gonna arrive sooner than maybe I think the commission might be anticipating, you know. So, but it's a great problem to have in terms of like there's this many good projects to, you know, to support. Other questions or thoughts on this schedule and associated?
No, so as I mentioned kind of at the beginning, next week when you meet again, we'll bring kind of that live interactive allocation chart. It'll indicate which sources of funds you can use. I assume that there will be quite a bit of discussion about which projects you'd like to fund and the ways in which you might like to fund them. And then that will certainly lead to, I think, the discussion you're already having about what does that mean for the balance of bond funds available and other projects that we might wish to support. So it's a great kind of, again, this is gearing up for next week's meeting so that you have kind of all the information in front of you for decision making. And we'll reach out to Tim Love and talk about kind of the Ferry Road funding options that they continue to explore. And if there's any update, we're happy to share those with you all.
Awesome. All right, well, if there's no other questions on these, let's move into the specific applications for new construction for this cycle.
And if I may, just for a moment, switch gears and try to reconnect our Zoom meeting for those that are following us there.
I got it.
Okay, thank you. All right. So jumping right in, and over the last two meetings, we've discussed the grant requests and the previous AHSP funded projects. Today, we would like to walk through and discuss the new construction projects that have applied for funding this year. We have 6 that we'll be reviewing today. We did have one project that had applied, the Sweden Creek Townhomes project. They ran into some fill issues on the site that they were planning for. And so they withdrew their application, and we'll be looking for another site and maybe a potential ask in a future cycle. So wanted to let you know that we did receive one application that won't be moving forward at this time.
Soil problems,
Some soil
builder
problems.
problems.
Yes,
And that was for a new project,
yes. Sweden Creek Townhomes,
okay, which we hadn't previewed before, but they.
correct.
Okay.
So just to give you an idea of the layout of the projects in the community, we've identified with the individual red stars, the locations of the multifamily projects. We also have the Asheville Buncombe Community Land Trust, and their model is more scattered sites, so a little harder to represent on the map. So we gave them the small 3 stars to call that out. Don't want to leave them out. So the first project would be the 319 Biltmore Apartments. This is a project brought to us by the Laurel Street Residential Development Group. They're requesting $1,950,000 for a project with a total cost of just over $65 million. This is total number of units would be 221 proposed, but only 67 of them would be affordable. And as staff reviewed that, we also wanted to make sure that the project's request was proportional to the number of affordable units. So we have made sure that they have followed that guideline within our funding requirements. This is located in Asheville. It is next door to Maple Crest. It currently has the conditional zoning approved, and the city of Asheville has already approved the land that the city currently owns to be purchased for the project for the price of $1. The project is anticipated and has received a commitment from the Housing Authority for 33 project-based vouchers.
So they do have some.
They do have
That's
some.
what I'm talking about.
Taking a look at their capital stack, they are pursuing a HUD 221 multifamily loan for a little over $42 million, as well as bringing in $21 million in private equity. We also listed on here the $1 acquisition price for the property, which represents an investment from the city of about $5.7 million for the original that came out of the affordable housing bond for the original purchase of the site. So the request on this was again $1,950,000. They have asked for terms of this loan to correspond to the HUD 221 loan, which is typically a requirement of those programs, is to match the length of that loan term, as well as a 1% cash flow interest rate with cash flow payment, which would be outside of the typical terms in the Affordable Housing Service Program. Taking a look at the unit mix, these units will be focused on households at 60 and 80% AMI and below. Again, 67 of them will be affordable, and will have a mix of sizes, efficiencies, 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units with a reasonable mix of those different sizes as affordable units as well. Although the project, the applicant indicated that they don't specifically target any certain populations, those age 55 plus, those with disabilities, they do expect to have a number of residents who would meet those categories. And again, they are projecting about 15% of their units would be used by voucher holders.
So
That's the project-based vouchers.
Yes.
So they would kind of have to for those, right?
that's a couple questions. Where does that 15% or you said 33 vouchers? Where does that number come from? Like, did they choose it or?
They chose it.
Okay.
And the housing authority committed 33 project-based vouchers to this project, or they've at least made a request for that and it's under consideration, or has housing authority already said we will commit 33 project-based vouchers?
I'm unaware of commitments made toward 319 Belmont. That doesn't mean there is or isn't there. I'm just not aware of this specific project.
Right.
So in preparation for this meeting, we did go back to the presentation Monique Pierre gave in December, and it does show 33 vouchers. The status of like agreements, formal agreements for that, we don't necessarily know, but it is indicated that they are attached to that project at this point.
They're sort of planning on that.
Yes.
So, and the benefit of the project is that with the project-based vouchers, then they're guaranteed that revenue, like that market rate revenue for this. So even though they're affordable units, the developer can count on that market rate level of guaranteed revenue for the project for decades to come.
Mhm.
So it's hugely beneficial to the project. If they didn't have that, then they'd be asking for, millions more in local public funding for the project.
And for a project like this that isn't LIHTC, how is it means tested for the tenants? How is that assured or guaranteed over time that there's affordable?
That would
for
be.
people that need?
That would be recorded in any of the funding commitments that are secured either through the city and their transfer of the property with a deed restriction and follow-up and monitoring on their part. If the county were to support it, then we would require that they demonstrate that those tenants were income eligible.
I see.
And so we sort of chatted about this a little bit before we started the meeting, but so, when the county took the Ferry Road project to the city for zoning approval last week before last, we've got, that project contemplates LIHTC projects being included, like 1 or 2, and then a bunch of other non-LIHTC multifamily developments, as well as like the homeownership parts. And so one of the questions I understand they asked the county, not at the zoning meeting itself, but like in some of the kind of conversations leading up to it, was would the county consider accepting vouchers for the rental units that are not the LIHTC, and LIHTC has to accept voucher holders, but would we accept it for the non-LIHTC? And I think our response was like, that's interesting idea. We're still very early in this, so we're not sure how that would affect the economics of the project. So we don't want to make a hard commitment on that yet, but a pretty interesting idea. And so I'm kind of wondering if like the city has asked their development team about that same question for this project, right? Because they've got 221 units, 67 are guaranteed to be affordable. And so they've got 154 market rate units that they're going to bring online. And if they would be willing to accept voucher holders for those units, that would be like it'd be a huge project, right? For like a landlord bringing a lot more units online to not be required to accept voucher holders for every one of them, but just to be open to it. So anyway, I just would kind of throw that out there as like a question as we look at these various applications. Like, is that something they've thought about, or is that something they would be willing to consider for the project?
And we can follow up with the applicant
Awesome.
for more information.
Because they're funding Thrive too, right? So they love the idea, right? So here's a project that they're kind of in control of because it's their own, they own the land, right? So it's sort of a unique situation. Cool. What other questions do folks have on this one?
I guess my only comment, which is why I'd be interested to answer that question in that further conversations. You know, I think we need more market rate multifamily. I just think that in general. But at the same time, given the quantity of affordable units in contrast to the market rate units on this project, it makes me nervous given the amount of public investment proposed on the table. So I don't know, just that's what I feel.
This one also fell without, outside our program guidelines too, correct?
Yes. So in our recommendation, as we looked at the project pro forma, part of the request was that the loan would be at a 40-year term with a 1% interest rate. That is outside of the AHSP loan maximum guidelines. It is also, as we review the pro forma, the cash flow did not demonstrate that the Affordable Housing Service Program funds were necessary in order to make it a viable project. So asking for additional or special optional terms wouldn't be necessary. So in this case, it's one of the projects that we would say would be eligible for our standard offerings. So 7 to 20-year term with interest rates ranging from 2.5% to 3.75% as part of the debt service on that project.
Yeah, and so I think this is like a been through zoning everywhere, so pretty shovel ready project. Then get their financing in order to do it. So this might be not a question they're interested in thinking about. But I just kind of along the lines of what Parker's asking about. I understand they didn't want to do like a purely affordable development for this project, right? Like they wanted to do a mix of market rate and affordable. And I think it's probably a good idea. But it's just, I guess just one of the questions that comes to mind is like, did you think about building a LIHTC project next to a market rate project? Because then like, they would on the same land, and just do kind of like what DFI showed us some of those options on some of our properties. Like they would be leveraging so many resources to the project if it did. So they're probably not interested in going back to the drawing board on this, but it's just a question that comes to mind. You get more affordability, probably less local public investment needed if it were that way. But maybe just a question, maybe more because like part of what I know the city's affordable housing plan also talks about, and some of the consultants we hired talk about like our committee and their committee, like we all need to talk more frequently. So it might just be a conversation that's worth having for future projects, right? Even if no one's going to be able to, adjust this one at this point. But yeah. All right. Any other questions on this one? All right.
Thanks.
What's next?
The next, we'll let Matt Carr.
Sure. Next is an application from the Asheville-Buncombe Community Land Trust. This request right here is for a total of $1.3 million. This request is in the form of a grant and not a construction loan. You're probably familiar with ABCLT and their model and how they permanently protect homes. Their model does not really allow for repayment of a loan as money from a local government is invested in that home and it stays with that home. So they're asking for a grant in this situation. The total project cost, and this is incorporating, and I'll show this on the next slide, homeowner mortgages is $5.2 million. It's anticipated that the total project would serve 20 units. 10 of those units would be funded through the AHSP program. As Jonathan mentioned earlier, this is a scattered site, so they haven't necessarily identified specific locations, but they would identify, areas throughout the county, the city of Asheville, to either purchase existing homes that they would purchase, or land that they could build a home on. So there's no site control currently. And getting to the question of vouchers, I think the way they've answered this is that they have a waiting list and they have, people that they're working with. And I think about 30%, 28% are voucher holders.
In the rental homes that they're in currently.
I don't know the answer. We've got Anna here. She,
About 30% of our home ownership applicant pool has vouchers,
In the rental homes that they're in currently.
whether they're in public housing or in project-based housing.
Right. Part of the reason I asked that is that someone mentioned, and I'd never heard of this, and maybe I'd heard the question wrongly, but as it was also in the subject of Ferry Road, someone talked about vouchers for home ownership. Okay, and so I had never heard this term before. Is that a thing?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
someone briefly explain it. So
Yeah, so residents,
yeah, come over to the mic on this. So,
yeah, so tenants who have vouchers can use those vouchers to purchase a home. So that's not just for a community land trust project. They can use that voucher on the open market. They can use it working with Habitat or any other organization. For tenants that are not elderly or disabled, they will be able to have the voucher pay part of their mortgage for the first 15 years of their mortgage. If they're elderly or disabled, it will cover the full 30 years of their mortgage. So it's based on their income. So just like in a rental situation, the housing authority will pay a portion of the mortgage, and then the owner will pay the remaining amount.
okay. You learn new things every day, right?
Yeah,
So,
thanks.
I didn't know
so
that.
so
I
if
didn't
you're,
know
if you're, because we just overwhelmingly hear this associated with like rental units, right? So, but if you hold a voucher and let's say you live in a place you're renting currently, but you, hey, yeah, I want to buy this house. Do the land trust, or maybe you just put it together yourself, however that happens, right? You can go and say, I want to take the subsidy that I received from my voucher that I currently that's applied to the rent of this property. I want to shift all that over and apply it to a mortgage on this property that I'm going to get an option to buy.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
can't speak to the formula they use. I know it's a really complex formula, but they do have a home ownership program. And so if a tenant is interested in home ownership, they would apply for that home ownership program
Okay.
and then receive all the numbers and information on how much the voucher would cover of the mortgage.
So it's not taking your current voucher and using it for that. It's like you apply for a different kind of voucher. It's a new voucher that you would get to go try to buy a home with.
Yes, that's my interpretation.
So it's not like every person in Buncombe County who currently has a voucher used for rental could automatically shift it over to a mortgage. It's like a different program that you apply.
Yeah,
for
there's
to
like
go
a
through.
step
Okay.
in between.
All right. Well, great. Thank you for trying to get us educated on
Thank
it.
you.
Appreciate it. Interesting. Okay.
all right, so looking at their budget just a little bit more, they've already got or have a $1.1 million commitment from the city of Asheville Housing Trust Fund, and they already have $200,000 from the town of Woodfin. So essentially what this would be doing is doubling that amount for a total of 2.6. And again, that 2.6 is reaching about 20 permanently protected homes. And you can see there on that scale or that graph, what local government funding will cover is about 50%, and then the home owner mortgages cover the additional 50%. So here's just a quick glance at AMI targets. Unit mix. With the unit mix, they're really kind of going after looking at 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom homes, and also get a feel for the target population there. And so, as we've talked about just a little bit, some of these applications do not meet current program guidelines. This is one of them, as this is being requested in the form of a grant. So the committee could look at this in a number of different ways. The committee could make an exception to the program guidelines and grant $1.3 million to ABCLT. But as you know, construction, typically the AHSP, so many acronyms, are typically construction loans, and the cap of a construction loan is 10%. And a situation like this could be 10%. And so, that second paragraph there is kind of a second avenue or way that the committee could look at this, that, we could recommend a loan of $130,000 per unit, but that would also come with an interest rate and repayment terms, et cetera, which, you know, as APCLT has kind of indicated that that's not really what their program does or can do. So, yeah, there's two kind of avenues to look at right there. Any questions or anything?
It's a good logo.
So the next project that we'd be looking at is the Lofts at Swananoa, developed by WDT Development. This is a 52-unit project in Swananoa in the same vicinity as East Haven Apartments. The total project cost is just over 14 million, and the request is $379,787. This project is a 9% applicant, so they have submitted their pre-application and have received the top points or the most points possible for their site score, and then would need to follow through with the full application in May when that is due in order to be eligible for those tax credits. They are one of two Buncombe County 9% tax credit projects, and this one is the only one that applied for the Affordable Housing Service Program.
What's the other one? What's the other one?
I forget the name of the other one right off the top of my head, but it's right off of Tunnel Road.
It's the MH
and-
project on Tunnel Road?
No, it's a different developer.
Different developer.
Yeah. It's near the corner of Swananoa River Road and Tunnel Road.
Okay. And I'm sorry, remind us, into the decision on which one gets the allocation will be in May? Or after May?
The application is due in May, and funding decisions for LIHTC usually happen in August or September. So the project currently has a site, an option agreement on the location, and 26 of these units are estimated to be rented to voucher holders. Taking a look at their capital stack, in addition to the LIHTC funding, they have also indicated they will be pursuing the rental production program loan, as well as the workforce housing loan program from NCHFA. And after the application was submitted, the applicant also reached out to let staff know that they were pursuing home funds. So this project is in consideration for that funding source as well. Looking at their unit mix, again, 52 units targeting households at all of the AMI levels that we typically look for in a project, including 13 at 30% and below, specifically focused on 1 and 2 bedroom units and a number of target populations that they will be serving. So staff's recommendation would be a loan up to $379,787 with the special terms as requested, with a cash flow annual payment and principal balloon. It's a relatively small request compared to the other applications for 52 units.
Have we had any communication with the other developer on the other 9% project?
We did reach out to them just prior to the application closing because they had submitted their pre-application for tax credit. So we reached out and let them know that the application was available, and glad to have them throw their hat in, but did not receive any response to that.
And that project, just for your benefit, it's the Swananoa River Village project. And that is at 292 Swananoa River Road. And it's a Pivotal GP Holding LLC is the applicant there.
Okay. So they didn't indicate, oh yeah, well, will apply this year, or maybe will apply next year? They just didn't have any plans at this point.
We reached out and asked if they were interested. They asked us to send materials and just they didn't follow back up to let us know if they had any
Right.
additional interest in it.
The next project is Pine Lane, which was an application submitted by the Roars Company. And this project is an 126-unit multifamily affordable development. Their project cost is $45.6 million, and their request is for $8.6 million. They're located in the city of Asheville, and they've submitted their pre-application for the technical review committee with the city. They have an option on the site, and they did not provide an estimate for the vouchers that would be used on the site, but they are willing to accept vouchers. So taking a look at their capital stack, so this is one of our 4%.
Hey, just a question. So,
Yeah.
so for 9% LIHTC projects, it's a requirement that they all accept vouchers, right? To qualify for 9% projects. So that's question one. And the question two is like, is it a requirement for 4% project? Aside from anything like Buncombe County might impose as a requirement, is it a condition, like a federal condition? I mean, obviously we would require it for putting $8 billion to the project, but like, would they be required to do that anyway if they got an award of 4% LIHTC project?
So they had mentioned in their application that they would adhere to NCHFA's requirements. I didn't get to look in the QAP to see exactly the language, but I think they can't put a barrier on voucher usage. So they said they would encourage usage, but not necessarily set like a specific target. So this is one of the 4% LIHTC projects. They are going to apply for that award. This is $16.7 million is what they're estimating that they could get for their net equity for that. They'll also plan to leverage tax-exempt bonds from NCHFA. And they also applied for an Asheville Housing Trust Fund loan of $3.8 million. And then for their deferred developer fee, I just wanted to note that they had indicated in their application that they would defer 1.8 million, but that's actually 75% of their developer fee, which is above the maximum that NCHFA requires. So we had reached back out to them. They submitted an updated pro forma, and so that actually the revised pro forma showed a little bit more flexibility for them to increase their permanent financing.
But they're only allowed to defer 1.26 million.
Oh, sorry.
That's all they can.
Yes.
That's maxing that out.
Yeah, that's the 50% of their developer fee.
Thank them for being willing to, if they were allowed to do it. Appreciate the spirit.
So this is showing their targets and unit mix. It's going to be all less than 60% AMI, and they're having 1, 2, 3, and 4 bedrooms. And then they indicated that 5% of the units would serve folks who are 55 and older.
Where does this project stand in their application to the city's housing trust fund?
So the city is considered that today during their affordable housing committee. So we've been having conversations with the staff. But I don't know if I don't know exactly what the committee recommended at this point. But the council will hear that next week or soon. So then for our recommendation, we would recommend a loan of between 7.5 million and 8.6 million with a 20-year term at a 2% interest rate, annual payments from cash flow with a balloon payment. And then if the committee decided a lesser loan amount, that would require the applicant to increase their permanent financing or secure other funding to complete their capital stack.
I have a question about this project. It also applies to the other 4% project that we'll see some slides on in a minute. So for both of them, so a couple of questions, and again, we were chatting about a couple of these before the meeting started. The follow-up questions I would have are, have they applied for project-based vouchers from the Housing Authority? Is that something that they've thought about or have actually had real conversations with the Housing Authority about? Like, as I think we've discussed, the Housing Authority does not currently have like a regularly scheduled process for making decisions around like how they will allocate them. But as we just saw from the project on Biltmore Avenue, that project they have reached out and they have gotten at least some kind of verbal agreement, if not a legal agreement, to get 33 project-based vouchers for that project. So for both of the 4% projects, I would just want to ask those same questions to the developers. Like, have you thought about this? And if the answer is no, would you be willing to do this? And we'd be happy. I mean, assuming the county comes down in a place where we're supportive of these projects, then we'd be happy to do anything we can to be to encourage the Housing Authority to think about it if they have additional ones to allocate, because it could very meaningfully, like financially, contribute to the projects, right? So, right. So for this one and the other one, and then the one other question I have for both of them is that, like we've talked about changes to our property tax policy. So are all of these LIHTC projects in the same, falling in the same place in terms of like how they would, whether they would qualify for property tax abatement with Buncombe County and the city of Asheville and the city of Asheville?
Yes, and I actually forgot to mention that they are structured with a nonprofit partner, and so they are planning on leveraging property tax exemption. That's part of their application.
Okay. And while that's on my mind, is the other 4% developer also gonna have a way to do that?
Yes.
Okay. So in addition to like if the county funded something in the range of what's outlined here, they would also get the property tax abatement benefit as well. Like, unlike in past cycles where they would have gotten the public investment, but not the benefits of the property taxes. So I just partly wanted to say that because like, as we're thinking about the different numbers here, they are getting an additional major benefit as well compared to like when we've looked at these projects in the past that they would not have qualified for.
Yeah.
And I guess with that in mind, I would also just ask, so you're saying they would qualify under our policy for loans in this range, but just based on the pro formas as they exist today, would the staff say, like it's your assessment that they require all of that funding for the project to be viable? Like in the context of they're also going to get the property tax benefits. Does the project need that full amount in order to be like financially viable, financeable project?
So in our analysis, we accounted for kind of like maxing out some of their other sources. So the lower end of the range is looking at if they were to maximize their permanent financing based on the amount of debt capacity that they could handle. And so with the numbers that we received, this is our best estimate. But these projects are very early in development. And so like a lot of things are not finalized in terms of their costs and
Sure,
stuff like that. And
understood.
so, yeah.
But your assessment based on a whole bunch of early assumptions is that if those assumptions turned out to be exactly that way, the project does need an investment of around 7.5 million in order to fill a legitimate gap in their pro forma to be a viable project is the way that's being thought about.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And just to add, because I think that's part of the question, when a property or when a developer is going to seek the tax exemption, we then analyze the pro forma under the assumption that they would be eligible to receive it, because that does increase their primary loan capacity, which then diminishes the gap financing need. So that would be, part of these assessments is looking at if they are an eligible developer that could seek it, how does that impact the gap need? Because it should, again, increase the ability for primary lending.
So the next project is the Rocky River Apartments, and that is an application that was submitted by Fitch Eric development. This project is an 120-unit multifamily project in Woodfin. The total project cost they submitted was $43.5 million, and they requested $8.8 million. However, that is actually exceeds the amount that they could have requested, and so in our analysis, we accounted for the maximum AHSP request, which would be 8.7. So this project is another 4% project. They've received zoning approval from the city of Woodfin, and they also have an option on their site. And then they estimated 28 units would be utilized by voucher holders. So taking a look at their capital stack, they would be leveraging tax exempt bonds from NCHFA. And then they also indicated that they would utilize 1.6 million from bond reinvestment proceeds within their project. And then their developer fee was, they indicated $412,500. However, that's only 15% of their developer fee, or that's 15% deferred. So just noting that for the committee.
And so if we could potentially go back and say, we'd like you to consider maybe doing a bit more on that. That's something we can talk about.
Yes, and we've had for developer fee. Yeah, we've had some conversations with them, and you'll see that reflected in the recommendation. So this is looking at their targets and unit mix. They're targeting 30 to 80% AMI. They have 1 through 4 bedrooms, and then 38% would they're estimating would be for folks who are 55 and older, 10% for folks who indicate having a disability, 15% for folks who identify as BIPOC, and then the 23% for voucher holders. So then considering that deferred developer fee discussion, so the committee could recommend a loan between 7.8 and 8.4 million with a 20-year term, interest rate 2%, annual payment from cash flow and balloon payment. And then that lesser loan amount would require them to increase their deferred developer fee or find additional financing to complete their capital stack.
I don't have any questions on the woods. I've mentioned on the other one, which apply to this one.
Yes.
Great location. Yeah. Yes.
I'm glad I'm not actually walking.
That could be dangerous. All right, this is the final construction project we're going to take a look at today. This is Rock Hill Place. Oh, excuse me, too far. All right, so what they have requested is $200,000 from AHSP. $200,000 is essentially the total cost, construction cost of the 4 units that they're proposing. This is located inside the city limits of Asheville and South Asheville off 31 or at 31 Rock Hill Place. And they do not have development approval. They would need to seek development approval through the city of Asheville. Rock Hill Place, or that portion of Rock Hill Place, is a private road. And so most likely they would have to do a major subdivision and probably do some infrastructure improvements to be able to make this development happen, which I don't believe has happened yet. So they do have kind of a verbal purchase agreement, just kind of probably to see what the outcome of this application is. And as far as voucher acceptance, or the question about vouchers, they stated in their application that they would, gladly accept vouchers, but they don't have any specific vouchers, allocated towards this project. So you see here with their budget requesting $200,000. It's a little unclear exactly what the total cost of this project is. In the HSP application budget, I think there was a $230,000 amount. So probably it's anticipated that it'd be a little bit more than $200,000, but this would pretty much be the entire cost of, construction.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But on that last slide, so the $200,000 would,
It's 100% of the construction cost
for 4 units,
for 4 units.
just $50,000 each.
They're micro units is what the way they're described.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So I think they're pretty small units. Perhaps done at, done affordably by the developer, constructed affordably. And so with those 4 units, this is kind of a snapshot. AMI targets, I think he's anticipating 60% or less. And kind of the population that will be served. He did specifically call out that they would be catering to the disabled population. So right now, I mean, it's a little difficult, I think, for staff to advise anything on this project. It does seem it's a little kind of premature at this point in time. They don't have any other source of funding. They're asking for entirely HSP funds to fund their project, and which, does not meet program requirements. Of course, going back to what program requirements are, it's that 10% max per unit. So they're asking for 100% of, construction cost. So this would have to be an exception. And, perhaps there's an alternate arrangement, which has been outlined in this recommendation. 10% obviously would be $20,000. So maybe there's another way to look at this. But I think staff does have some difficulties with this project.
Okay. Yeah.
Any questions?
But it's pretty interesting though. I mean, it does meet the criteria, but it's a little unit for $50,000.
It's a great location too.
Yeah. That's different than anything we see. So,
We've never seen anything like this.
Right. Any other specific questions for now? Oh, and by the way, too, like, 'cause I think I came into this meeting thinking we might try to make preliminary funding recommendations today, but the staff informed me like, that's actually the next meeting. So we don't have to say yes, no, maybe today. We've got more time to think about all of these. So. All right, what's next?
So before we wrap up this discussion on these projects, just wanted to provide a little bit of context and overview of the recommendations. And I think this maybe speaks to the point about the staff analysis and how we review projects and kind of that level of viability of them. One of those elements is the vacancy rate going into projects, and it's something that we've received a bit of feedback from the developers and the applicants on this year. Part of our strategy is to look at the project's cash flow in comparison to the principal and interest on their loans and the deferred developer fee to see if the project at that 7% vacancy would be able to repay those soft loans and developer fees with that 7% assumption as sort of an industry standard, knowing that North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, banks, other lenders, other local government sources are going to be looking at that benchmark. But then also recognizing, and I'm going to slide this slide forward just a little bit, just one tab, and it will change ever so slightly. But to also look at a lower 3% vacancy rate, something closer to what we might see in our community. The idea is not that we would be underwriting at that 3% level, but that we would look at the 7% standard and then say, hey, it might be that the cash flow could generate more of a return towards those repayments if the reality were closer to a 3%. So just to give some context and say, here's the standard. Now can we look at the project and what it might actually yield in terms of repayment at a better vacancy rate?
So, but in terms of the underwriting and financial planning for the projects, the 7% is what the developer will have to do, and like we will have to make decisions kind of consistent with that.
Correct.
Underlying conservative assumption, right? But if the reality turns out that the vacancy is more like 3%, and then so therefore there's more rental income coming into the project, from a practical standpoint, what that's going to mean for us is that we're going to get more of our loan repaid sooner rather than later, right? Because there will be more cash flow to do that. So for all these different developers, it's kind of like expected to be pretty standardized that our agreement with them will say like, you repay our loan consistent with the cash flow that in reality exists to repay it. So if it's there,
Yes.
pay it. If it's not there, because your vacancy really is 7% or for other reasons, then that's okay. That's probably the oversimplified way of thinking about it, but is that correct?
That is accurate,
Okay.
yes. And then as you will be considering the funding recommendations next week, just to look at how these 6 projects would impact the targets, the goals for the Affordable Housing Service Program. So under the homeownership category, the Asheville Buncombe Community Land Trust, if funded, would add an additional 10 units to the homeownership goal. Then taking a look at rental units at less than 80% AMI. So the other 4 rental projects would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 365 potential new units towards that goal, depending on if one or all of them were funded. That could be 3 to 20%. That could represent 3 to 20% of that 1,850 projected units. Similar, oh, sorry.
Sorry to interrupt you. Do you go back real fast to the homeownership goal? Okay, it's 375. Okay, thank you.
And then also looking at rental units leveraging tax credits. So lofts at Swannanoa, Pine Lane, and Rocky River would potentially add another 298 units. And again, that's somewhere depending on if one or all of the projects were funded, 3 to 20% of the goal could be accomplished with these 3 projects. And then finally for,
Could you back one slide?
Sure.
The goal, says the goal is 1480.
yes,
In the previous slide, so the goal is 1850. I'm sorry.
oh, sorry. The previous goal was for all rental units at or serving households at or below 80% AMI.
Right.
And then the other goal, the 1480, was for those that are leveraging LIHTC.
Thank you.
Sure. And then the final metric would be looking at the rental units for households at 30% AMI and below. The goal here would be 200 at this point. If all of the committed units were accomplished, we would be above the stated goal, and the new units would push us up to as much as 72 above that. So I think that is all that we have. In review, the 4 multifamily projects, they do appear to adhere to the Affordable Housing Service Program requirements. Eligible for funding, present a healthy financial position, and would plan to break ground by the end of June of next year, and could be funded with either full or partial amounts. And again, the Asheville Buncombe Community Land Trust and Vision Property projects do not particularly align. That would require exceptions in order to receive funding. Questions?
Okay. And so thank you for the great presentations. And we'll need to make these decisions, or at least some decisions at our next meeting on these and other proposals. So anything else we need to go over afternoon?
So just taking a look at next steps on the calendar. So again, yes, next Tuesday would be a special called meeting. There is a budget work session scheduled for that morning. So the staff suggestion would be to push that meeting until later in the afternoon. If a 3:30 time would work, we could go ahead and schedule that.
Feel like if history is a guide, our morning meeting will end by lunch. But
That was the
I've been wrong
initial
before.
indication, but we received information from the manager's office that they do expect it will actually go after lunch, and they ask us to reach out to you all through this meeting and see if you'd be willing to adjust the time frame just to ensure there was enough time available for the budget
Sure.
items.
We're gonna add that piece around like starting the next strategic plan, that meeting, is that right? Is that the meeting that
They
this happened
didn't
at?
share what they were adding to it, but it
There's some.
was gonna create a longer
Okay.
session than they originally anticipated.
All right. I'm available to meet that.
you said 3:30.
Yes.
To start at 3:30?
Our work session goes, it says till 2, so that is after lunch, but
Oh,
I
okay.
mean, we have to. I know we have to notice it, so.
Yeah. I'm free all afternoon. I would like to start, all things being equal, as soon as early as we can. So, yeah, y'all can just confirm what that is.
Yeah, same.
So we'll reach out to the manager's office and budget office and confirm when they anticipate ending and tentatively slate our meeting to begin with enough time for you to run them.
Thank you. All right, perfect. All right, anything else?
That's all we have.
Okay. Then I think we are ready to adjourn. So thanks, everyone, for a very productive meeting.
Thank you very much.